Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's Side by Side Digital. I'm your host, Rebecca Shively. We've got a great program lined up today. This month, we're talking about the art of the side hustle. In other words, how can alternative revenue streams help support your operation? We're joined today by two terrific experts, Taylor and Travis. They're going to walk us through how to master the art of the side hustle, as well as answer all of our questions near the end of the presentation. Taylor, Travis, thanks for being here. I'll let you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about you and your background. Taylor, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Thanks, Rebecca. My name's Taylor Jensen. I grew up in southeast South Dakota on a corn, soybean, and cow-calf type operation. My dad's the primary farmer there, and I help out on the side as I'm able. Previous to working at Farm Credit, worked for a seed and chemical company for about 4 years, and have worked for Farm Credit Services of America for right around 2 years now. Excited to be with you all and talk about ways that revenue can be generated outside of just the farming operation.
And my name is Travis Maiskeier. I'm a financial services officer here with Farm Credit Services of America. Been with the company for about 4 years now. Spent my first 3 years up in northern Iowa working that territory. And here about a year ago, transferred down to our Mount Pleasant, Iowa location where I'm now doing the same thing. So I grew up in northeast Iowa. Went to Iowa State for my schooling there and have been with Farm Credit ever since. Currently live here in southeast Iowa with my wife, and we're actively engaged in the family farm down here, and looking forward to continuing that throughout our life. But to get started, obviously today we are here to learn about the art of the side hustle. But to get started, let's get a feel for kind of what everyone's experience level is at this point. Go ahead and answer the poll question here of, are you a serious hustler at this point, or just starting to get your toes wet and figure out what you want to do for a potential side hustle? And Taylor, you and I see some pretty interesting ones come across our desks with customers, especially the younger producers. So I'm excited to see what some of these answers are to how experienced some people are and kind of what we're working with today. Well, it looks like here have a little bit of a mix across the board, but majority of you are exploring the idea of taking on a side hustle and adding some additional revenue to your operation there. So now I think Taylor and I will discuss just a few of the ideas that we've seen come across our desk here with some of the more traditional side hustles that we see, plus some of the more unique ones that we've seen. So I think we've seen a lot of our friends and neighbors and family members do the custom spraying or the custom harvesting, custom trucking, things like that, utilizing assets that they already have on the farm. All those are great options to start with, and again, very common. A few more common ones that I see are doing some crop adjusting, actually working with a crop insurance company and going out and adjusting crops, whether they're in the field or after harvest, measuring grain bins, doing things like that. That's becoming more and more popular, I've noticed here over the past couple of years. And Taylor, do you want to hit on a couple of the less traditional ones that you've seen?
Yeah, some of the less traditional ones that I've seen, folks that have a good skilled trade, so whether that be something like carpentry, welding, metal fabrication, things like that. There's a farmer in the hometown I grew up, and they actually run a food business, food stand, and so during the summertime, fall time, they'll do catering and different things like that. And then some of the other input from folks in our office as well that I thought was really neat was taking some of those soft skills that folks might have from college. So someone that didn't necessarily, they grew up on a farm, didn't go to, maybe they went to Iowa State, South Dakota State, didn't major in an ag degree. They took something like computer science or graphic design or web design, and they farm, maybe farm with their family or farm full time, and then on the side they do some things related to that degree, whether it be coding or graphic design. That I think COVID is showing that in 2020, a lot of stuff can be done remote. We don't need to be tied to an office. And so I think a lot of those things that hey, I don't have, maybe it's not the truck or the sprayer sitting there. It's kind of that, okay, what skill sets do I have that I can be using to provide some, some revenue generation. And those are ones that we saw that, hey, that don't involve doing this full time, but, definitely can be done on a, what I would call probably like a freelance type basis.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. And I think COVID really kind of shedded a light on, and we'll talk about this later, but shedded a light on how big your community can really become and how far you can reach from just working from home and doing kind of a side hustle from your house.
Yeah, and the nice thing about some of these less traditional side hustles, another traditional one that came to mind was, some folks do some tiling or excavation type work as well. Off the poll question, a lot of people, they're looking to dip their toes in the water. And so, maybe making a huge capital purchase isn't in the cards right now. Looking at some of those less traditional side hustles that require more of a soft skill set rather than, an outlay of capital can be a real option to get the ball rolling. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Travis. Out of the customers that you work with, or neighbors or folks that you work with, that do a side hustle, did most of them start fairly small? How did that process usually start?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Taylor. And what I've seen throughout my career is the side hustles tend to start pretty small. It's just something where, hey, I have a little free time in a certain part of the year, I want to earn a little extra revenue. So they just start with something pretty small, and depending what type of side hustle you're getting into, we'll get into kind of the needs analysis and evaluating how big you want it to get here a little later. But they can stay pretty small, or if you do a good job at it and it's really something that's needed in your community, it can really grow to sometimes almost be more of your primary income than what was meant to be, just a secondary alternative income.
I want to hear what some of you folks, what do you see, whether it be neighbors doing, yourselves doing, or what you're considering doing as an interesting side hustle?
Yeah, so I used to work up in northern Iowa, and an individual up there, they actually were into turtle production, which seems pretty darn unique, but I guess when you get down to it, it's just another form of livestock is what it was to them. But yeah, they just dug themselves a couple small ponds in one of their fields, put some fences around it, and up there it's pretty low water table, or pretty high water table, I should say. So filled up the ponds, and then they actually put a couple incubators in their shop. And what they did is they had turtle production for meat, is what it was essentially. So they grow the turtles throughout the summer, and then they were actually shipped overseas for meat production in certain countries. I guess that's a delicacy. So that was a very unique one that I've seen that really didn't take a lot of capital outlay because they simply had to use some equipment they had to dig a few small ponds and create some incubators to go in their shop with space they already had. So that just, I think, shows that a little creativity and really diving into the needs analysis of, hey, what need is there out there? Maybe it's a little out of the ordinary. Maybe it's not something that you're too terribly involved in, but what do other people want, and what will other people pay me to do or pay me to produce that I can do in my spare time?
Yeah, some of the answers we had from folks were some woodworking and cabinet work. Let's see, horseshoe welded art. That's an interesting one. I never heard of that, but kind of some crafty type things. Raising crickets. That might give your turtles a run for your money. Someone else posted, social media / YouTube and Twitter and things like that. That's one I've seen as well. Folks having fairly big followings on, whether it be TikTok, Twitter, or whatever, and then almost kind of like the influencer economy. And if you've heard of that, selling sheep manure in bags to gardeners. Yeah, if that's another neat one. And then selling chicken feed. So kind of pretty, yeah, I think side hustles can be as creative as you want them to be.
Absolutely. And those are some pretty interesting ones. I kind of have to laugh at the cricket one here. I was at an event here about a year ago, and it was an entrepreneurship type event, and one of the candidates was actually using crickets for food and turning them into like a protein meal. So it's maybe they're connected one way or another, but yeah, that's a pretty unique one. Next thing is, now that we've talked about all these different types of side hustles, how do you get started? The first thing really on how do you get started is really doing that needs analysis of what do I have to offer that people around me, and we can get into that a little more on what that really means, but what do I have to offer that can fill a need for someone else? And when you're doing that, you really have to look at a lot of different aspects of it. Consider both the physical assets that you have with, maybe machinery on the farm, other farming assets like that. But also, like Taylor said earlier, a big part of that is, what are your soft skills? What are your soft assets? What knowledge do you have in your brain that, maybe you can share to earn an extra revenue, whether that's, coding or doing some type of graphic design, something like that. So consider all your different assets that you have at your disposal. And then the last one I'll hit on before I turn it over to Taylor here is, how do you differentiate yourself from others? Because I think we can all look around our community, and we'll use custom spraying, for instance. There may already be a couple of your neighbors that are doing some custom spraying. So if that's something you're wanting to do, how are you going to differentiate yourself from those individuals, or, selling seed, custom trucking, whatever that may be. So you want to be successful, you need to be a little bit different than others that are already doing that similar thing. So Taylor, why don't you hit a little bit on the looking outside here?
Yeah, I think, part of that needs analysis is, what needs do you see in your own community? And I think there's two ways to look at community. One of them is, who are the folks physically next to you? What needs, whether it be a neighboring town, whether it be your township, what needs are there? And that's proximity, your community, looking at proximity. Kind of going back to, I'm sure we're all kind of tired of hearing of it, but COVID in 2020 really made us, I think, kind of think about, wow, the World Wide Web. And you don't necessarily need to do something. You don't need to be present somewhere to do something. And so even taking a wider step out, what other skills or assets do you have that can meet a need, maybe not necessarily in your local community, but that can be utilized, via the internet to generate revenue and things like that. And then I would hit on that bottom point pretty hard too, is a lot of the times you don't know what you don't know. I think about that previous slide, and I never thought about I never thought about doing X, Y, or Z to generate revenue. I know for myself, Twitter, I follow a number of folks in the ag space that I think are just incredibly smart that, I would have never considered X, Y, or Z if I didn't think about what they were doing or seeing what they were doing. And so that's been I think that's one way to kind of broaden those connections and learn from other people. I think another spot as well is who's doing something that, as you look at their business or their side hustle, that maybe they don't have a good transition plan. So maybe it's kind of an older person that's they're working pretty hard, and they need some help, and they don't have maybe you don't see a clear transition plan that how would that business continue. I think that could be a need that you could fulfill of, yeah, hey, this person's doing this and maybe they need some help, and I could help step into that business. And then it's less, you don't have to worry about differentiating or competing. You're really creating a win-win situation where that established person who has relationships, you're you're stepping into that and they're getting some labor and I think there's some good things to think about. Who's doing something really well? Can I join them? And is there room for me or a spot for you to join them in that? So I think, just taking a really good inventory of, what needs are there, and then how can I generate new ideas for even considering things I hadn't thought about before.
Absolutely. And I really love your point there, Taylor, of you don't always have to create your own new thing. You can, if someone else is doing well at it, being a part of a team is, a great thing. So, joining up with someone who already has a good thing going on, if that's possible, maybe is what's right for you. The next thing is, we have this idea. How do we evaluate it? There's a lot of considerations. And I think for me, my biggest resource is time. So that's one thing when you're considering your potential side hustle is how much time do I have? Because you can go to the bank and you can work with your loan officer about getting some capital resources, things like that. But time is one of those things that you only have so much of it. So what I think is very important to do is physically get out a calendar and kind of walk through every single month of the year and see when are you busy and when do you have time to spend time away from the farm or away from your primary income to generate this secondary income. And I'll use a row crop farmer, for example, and I'll kind of start their calendar year in a little different spot than the actual calendar year. I'll start it right about now in spring. We all know row crop farmers are starting to get really busy the latter part of March and the first part of April, at least here in the part of Iowa that I'm in. So, really through April, May, and probably the first part of June, they're pretty busy doing field work, planting, doing all that kind of good stuff, even spraying if you do your own spraying. So those first few months, really probably not a good time for them to be looking at anything. But then, the second half of summer, things slow down for them a little bit until harvest picks back up there in October, November time period. But then November rolls around and, the holidays are here and, you're not doing field work in the dead of winter down here. So you kind of have that December, January, February, March time period to again, maybe allocate some time to something else. So one of the first things I would probably recommend doing is make that calendar, maybe draw yourself a line on a piece of paper and draw out when do you have time and start there. If your free time is in the dead of winter, well, custom spraying or doing field work probably isn't what you want to do because you can't do that in the middle of winter. So start with your time allocation and then kind of work backwards from there of, what is a need in that point of time throughout the year that I can really devote myself to and earn the respect and the business of those that are hiring me to do it. Other considerations, obviously relationships. You want to understand who else is doing these things around you. That way you don't potentially step on the toes of a neighbor or a family member who's already doing something similar to that. You don't want to become an enemy of a neighbor or something like that because now you're competitors versus just neighbors. So those are just a couple, things on thinking wide about the considerations of a side hustle. Tyler, what do you, as you look into thinking far out, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, financially, that first point, thinking about the short term and the long term. The short term, the thing that comes to mind, is there a capital outlay? Is this going to be a payment involved with, some physical asset? Longer term things that come to mind there as well. Let's say you start custom trucking or spraying or anything like that. Depreciation's a real expense. Increased wear and tear is a real expense. And so thinking about, okay, if I'm going to be using physical assets, how am I that are also used on the farm? How are things going to be? Am I accounting for increased wear and tear above normal repairs or anything like that? I mean, those are some things that stand out initially. Another thing I think that's really important to think about is what are your revenue expectations? What is the size and scope of the side hustle you're looking at, and what are your goals? Are you looking to replace, or generate $20,000 of revenue that really goes to off-farm living that takes care of a large portion of that, or is it'd be nice to earn a couple $1,000 so that way when we go on family vacation, it's not something we feel guilty about. It's, hey, this is the money that we've generated for this specific purpose, and we get to really just enjoy that vacation because you know what, we put in the time and the energy to the side hustle, and it's paid off and it's rewarded us, and we're going to enjoy that. So I think considering, along with that, okay, how much time do I have to put into this? What are my revenue expectations and what are my goals? What am I really looking for in regards to the financial success of this side hustle? And then, long-term risks and rewards. I think that gets into probably specifically, if, like you had said, Travis, if you can build a side hustle that kind of morphs into your primary hustle, there can be some real financial rewards to finding something that people need and doing it really well. The risks, I think that probably comes down to probably some capital type stuff. How much money are you getting tied into this? But also time, how much time are you going to put into this? Because that's just the most limited resource we all have.
Absolutely. And kind of the last one you have to think about is, I wouldn't say think about, but that you really have to do is do your homework. A little bit of market research really goes a long way. And I think people, when they hear the term market research, they kind of get pulled back and they say, I don't want to spend a bunch of time on the internet doing research on this, that, or the other. It doesn't always have to be, like that. It can be as simple as going to some of your friends, neighbors, family members, and just asking them the simple question, hey, I have X idea. Would you pay me to do that? Is that something you would be willing to pay to have done? One thing I was told a long time ago is find something that no one else wants to do, and you'll probably make a pretty good living out of doing that. So, just think about those things of what would I be willing to pay someone to do? And if you're willing to pay someone for it, maybe someone else is too. A couple examples that I have of that, I think about, kind of on a personal level, my father, he's getting older, loves to go camping. He's 70 years old. He doesn't want to cut firewood anymore. He will gladly pay someone to cut his firewood for him. And that's a pretty minor side hustle. If you have a chainsaw and some pasture laying around, odds are you have some trees that you can go cut down and have a firewood, for sale sign at the end of your lane for someone to buy firewood from you, and that's something that he, for example, is willing to pay for. That's really pretty simple and a low expense for you to do. Another example is kind of a funnier one is, the porta potty business. Not many people want to spend too much time in a porta potty, but, so the people who have those companies, I would assume, make some pretty good money because not a lot of other people want to do it. So do your homework. Ask the right questions to your neighbors, your family. Asking questions is free. So spend some time doing that market research and asking those questions. Next, we can kind of talk about, what to watch out for. What are things you need to be really, really aware for? And, Taylor, do you have any good examples of, relationships that you have to kind of watch out for when you're getting into something like this?
I think you hit on it of, neighbors and things like that, hey, we're just neighbors and you do this. And next thing you know, oh yeah, I want to do this too. And it becomes, less of a neighborly relationship and more of a, oh yeah, hey, there's some competing business. I mean, I think, you hit on like custom spraying or selling seed or anything like that. There's those can be things that it can change that dynamic. Not necessarily bad, but it just can change the dynamic to what you're used to. And those would be two that I would highlight in that space. And kind of going along with that relationship piece is I think about the overconfidence. As lenders, we'll put together cash flows with customers and things like that. When we put together a cash flow, we don't use the highest yields that this farm this one year, grew 275 bushel corn, and it was just out of the bar, and so we try to be pretty realistic in our projected cash flows because life happens. I mean, I think that's something we all have experience with. Okay, we make some plans and things don't always go according to plan. And so, taking when yeah, when you're thinking about the side hustle, come in with good, ambition is good, but realistic expectations, I think, can be a really good thing when we're kind of putting stuff up on the whiteboard. And I think that's where mentors or other people that have expertise or friends or whoever can kind of come in and say, well, okay, yeah, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? And I think that can kind of help temper that overconfidence a little bit.
Absolutely. It's that overconfidence kind of relates back to what are your expectations too? How much revenue do you want this to produce? And that, kind of depends on how much you want to do. And another thing to really watch out for are your resources. I think a lot of people on this webinar today are probably younger individuals. And as younger individuals, starting farming, we all understand that farming right now with $5 corn and $14 beans seems pretty profitable. But a lot of times in agriculture, especially for a younger individual just getting started, capital's pretty tight. So you want to be very aware of your resources, both time and financially. And this is one where you really have to think far down the road of, okay, let's say hypothetically your side hustle takes a fair amount of capital outlay. We've been using the sprayer example a lot today, so I'll use that one. If you don't already own a self-propelled sprayer, you could be looking at potentially a couple $100,000 to get into one of those. As a young producer, is that where you want to spend your capital? You only have so much dry powder. So is that where you really want to spend your capital on this side hustle? Maybe it is. Maybe it's something you feel passionate about and something that'll continue to produce revenue to pay for that sprayer over time. But be thinking down the road, and those are good questions to ask your lender of, okay, if I do this, if I spend this money on this venture, how is it going to impact me 1 or 3 years down the road to be able to potentially buy that first farm that I've been having my eye on? So just be thinking down the road, use a long-term vision about what your overall plans are, because as great as side hustles are, you hate for them to all of a sudden be a hamper to your primary income or your real true passions, which for a lot of the people on this call, I'm assuming is production agriculture. And the last one to kind of watch out for is going back to that overscheduling of, make sure whatever you're doing, you have time to devote wholeheartedly to that venture. So.
Yeah, I think about myself, I'm a younger individual, married. We've got one daughter who's about 1.5 years and another one due here in June. And so, yeah, that overscheduling piece is, that's a real thing. I mean, you want to have time for family. You want to have time for friendships and other sources of meaning in your life outside of just working. And I think that kind of ties back to what you were saying, Travis, of, when, instead of, okay, I usually work 8 hours a day. Now I'm going to work 12 hours a day. Maybe it's, okay, where am I working 10 hours a day? What times of the year? And then what times of the year am I not working as much and utilizing that time more efficiently? And I think you're 100% on the resources piece of, how is this going to affect me? And that gets back to that previous slide. How's that going to affect me down the road? What's not just my 1 year goal, but what are my 3 to 5 year goals, and how does this all kind of fit into that? I think that was fantastic. So
absolutely. And I think kind of the last slide we have here is, I don't know how many Jurassic Park fans we have on the call today. I always thought that was kind of a good movie, but just remember this meme of, you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could do it, you didn't think about, should I do it? I find myself guilty of this. You could ask my wife, well, we can do that. We can do that. Well, should we? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. So spend the time doing your market research, and that way, whatever you decide to do is truly, hopefully, the best thing for your operation and the best thing for your family. So questions. I think we have a few questions rolling in here. Taylor and I would love to answer a few of those. Looks like the first one we have here, Taylor, is would you consider working for an established farmer a side hustle?
Yeah, I think that was one piece that I wanted to bring up, or at least highlight. Yeah, a side hustle doesn't necessarily need to be I'm going and starting my own business. That kind of goes back to that, who's already doing something really well and how can I join in with them. And so if an established farmer has some needs, has labor needs or whatever that is, and you can make it work with the operation that you have, I think that's a great way to generate some additional income, especially if timing, I think, is probably the biggest piece with that. If you're a row crop farmer and they're a row crop farmer and you're all busy at the same time, that might be a little harder. But if it works out where we can work this in our schedule, I would definitely consider that as a great hustle to generate additional revenue. I know for myself, we grew up doing things a certain way. I always appreciate seeing how other folks do things, just because that's it's just a different way to look at things, and you learn when you do that. So
absolutely. And I would agree with you 100% on that, Taylor. It's a side hustle can be anything that brings in extra revenue to your family or to your operation. So 100% there. And, on the banker side of things, that's a very low risk thing for you to do. That takes absolutely no risk on your part to put in a few extra hours there. So no, that's definitely one to consider. But looks like the next one, are there opportunities for funding for some of these side projects through Farm Credit or other avenues? I'd say, there's always opportunities out there for additional capital for these projects. It's just a matter of who's willing to give you that funding. Farm Credit, I won't speak for other people, but for Farm Credit, our lending ability is strictly towards agriculture. So if you have a solid business plan of what your side hustle venture may be, and it's related to agriculture, I would really encourage you to go talk to your financial officer and propose to them with a balance sheet and cash flow and so on and so forth of what you want to do, and see if they can't help you provide some of that capital to do so. The biggest thing, if you're going to start outlaying capital to do a side hustle, especially a large amount of capital, you really have to have a solid business plan. You're probably getting into more of a formal written business plan, a formal written projection on something like that than you are if you're just going to simply go cut some firewood out of your pasture and put a for sale sign up, on your front lawn for that stuff. So it kind of risk reward type thing. The more risk you want to take to get the higher reward, the little more effort it's going to take on the banking side of things to help you fund that capital. But anything to add to that, Taylor?
No, I think you hit it on the head. The plan depends on the size and scope, and that kind of comes back to what are my goals? What are my that's really gonna depend on that's gonna flow into how detailed of a plan do I have? How much thought, time, effort, research have I really put into this? Those are gonna be huge things in that realm. Another question we had was, what should younger farmers consider so their side hustles don't put their farm or ranch at risk? And I think that ties in really well to the things we talked about in regards to capital and what you were talking about on that risk reward. I would float towards things that are more of the untraditional side hustles, things that don't involve a large amount of capital, things that involve skill sets that you already have. Those can generate revenue pretty quickly, pretty rapidly, and they don't involve a ton of risk outside of the time that you're putting in. You're not putting things up for collateral. You're not borrowing additional capital. So taking some of those skills that you already have and figuring out what times of the year I can put those skills to work. I think that's those type of assets are going to be the ones that are really low risk for a younger producer.
Absolutely, Taylor. The farmer of this generation has a whole different set of skill sets than, our grandpas and grandmas who farmed, 50, 60 years ago. So use use your ability to harness technology, your skills in technology, your, college education or high school education. Don't be afraid to use your brains just versus your back to produce this side hustle income. But let's see here. What else do we have? This one we've kind of hit on already, but what kinds of plans should I have put together when starting out? Do I need a business plan? What does my banker want to see? Kind of hit on that one. Like Taylor said, it really depends on the size and the scope of your project. If you're doing something pretty simple that doesn't entail a lot of capital outlay, probably don't need a real formal business plan, or, really don't need to talk with your banker too much about it if you're not, outlaying a bunch of capital and you don't expect this to turn into a large revenue stream. But the bigger your project you're taking on, the more effort and time you need to put into that business plan and talking with your lender about it.
Yeah, and I think to tie into that, in my previous role as a sales representative, we would do business plans with our dealers every year. And the most successful dealers that I had, the ones that grew their market share year after year, the ones that, grew their business, were the ones that had a pretty detailed plan of, here's where my business is going to come from. Here's the activities that I'm going to be doing to ensure that revenue is generated. And so I would say, can your lender tell that you've put a lot of time and effort in consideration into the business plan? Or is this kind of just a spitball off the wall type of an idea? So I think the more prepared that you can be, and the more thought that you can put into it and show that to your lender, I think that's going to be, those would be pretty key things that I'd watch out for. So.
Absolutely.
Another question we had: do you see more young people getting into side businesses more than established farmers? I would say probably yes. Oftentimes, especially if it's, maybe it's father, mother, daughter, son, whatever the gap is there. Oftentimes the older generation just has more assets, different things like that, maybe there's less of a need I guess I would say too, though, I've seen a number of people who had a side hustle, and their side hustle became very successful, and they like to farm. And so they've used their side hustle to fund their farming operation. And so, I would say I see more of the younger people do it. But and part of that could just be, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurship in folks our age. I think there's a lot of folks willing to try different things, and so I think that's where some of that stems from as well.
Absolutely. Nope, you're right on there, and I don't have a whole lot more to add to that question, Taylor. I think you pretty much encompassed all of it, and with that, I think that's pretty much all of the questions we had. So Taylor and I really appreciate everyone's time for joining us today on the webinar. We hope you gained something out of this, and we would just recommend that if you have an idea, don't be afraid to talk with your financial officer about it and explain to them what you want to get started doing. So Taylor, anything else you want to add here before we finish up?
No, I think you hit it on the head, hit the nail on the head there. Don't be afraid to look for outside resources, mentors, whether that be your lending officer, an aunt and uncle, or a parent, a mentor. And then don't be afraid to kind of, look online, see what other people are doing, and then see how, hey, maybe I could do that. I think being creative and you just don't know what you don't know. And so the more input you can get, the more ideas you can think of, I think the better off you'll be as you start to explore what a good side hustle could be.
Absolutely. So I guess everyone just keep on hustling out there.
Well, thanks, guys. I want to thank Taylor and Travis for being here today and answering our questions. Thank you in the audience for all of your great insights and questions as well. I think everyone's a little intrigued by the idea of raising crickets. So that's a big takeaway. I think also Jurassic Park rule are wise rules to live by. So thanks again for joining us. We'll be back next month on May 5th, where we'll be talking about strategies for growing your operation while managing some of those family dynamics that can sometimes be challenging. Till then, take good care, and we hope to see you online soon.